Recent elections for the Wisconsin State Supreme Court have seen big spending, negative ads, and special interest groups trying to influence the elections. Is it time for a change? A former Supreme Court justice is now saying yes, she believes Wisconsin needs a different way to select Supreme Court justices. We're joined now by Janine Geske, who served on the Supreme Court from 1993 to 1998 and served as a distinguished professor of law at Marquette University Law School. Justice Geske, good to have you back on the program.
Nice to be here, Mike.
So my guess is this was not an easy decision for you. Why did you reach the decision that you think appointing justices is better than electing them?
Well, and it's been something, obviously, that I've been thinking about for some time over these last several elections. But after listening to people have very little faith in the Supreme Court, watching what happens to the candidates, both those who win and those who lose, and then the whole issue of all the money being involved in their campaigns, potentially influencing them in decision making, I thought we can't continue this way. We had a court that was highly respected nationally as being the kind of court that was impartial, that carefully looked at the law. And I'm not saying our justices don't do that, but that's not the public perception anymore because of the nature of races, the money that's behind it, and the kinds of ads that are really being the impetus of how we elect our justices.
So there are about 24, 24 states that do appointed process. Help people understand, what does that look like in real terms?
Well, and there are disadvantages to that, but in a lot of states, there is some kind of panel that's set up. We have a panel as well. Governor Walker has set up a panel. But in most states that have appointed rather than elected, it's a bipartisan panel, and sometimes with a few more people from the party of the governor, and sometimes members of the bar, members of the community. But it's a panel that looks at the qualifications of the candidates and then makes a recommendation to the governor, sometimes 3, sometimes 5. There are clearly political influences in that, but it's not the kind of process that involves these ads that are basically dredging up people's prior lives, attacking people on ethics, impugning the integrity of the court. It really is a process where their qualifications can be laid out and the committee can say, here, Governor, here's a list, select one of them.
Some states actually do something even more far-fetched than that. I don't want to call it far-fetched, but they have partisan elections. Could we not sort of address some of these things if we simply admitted these are partisan elections?
Well, I would say we have partisan elections, and frankly, even though we don't call them partisan elections, this last election was a prime example. And I can tell you that the number of judges and lawyers who are interested, particularly in the Supreme Court, have said to me, we're going to have to just run partisan, whether we call ourselves partisan or not. One side supporting one candidate and one is the other. And what's happening is a lot of highly qualified lawyers and judges are not seeking to get to the Supreme Court anymore because they don't want to put their families or their reputations at issue that way. And so we're losing a lot of good candidates. I'm not impugning the integrity or the reputation of anybody there, but there are a lot of people that I think would be wonderful Supreme Court justices that are simply not going to put themselves or their families through that.
So a couple of arguments against the appointed justice process is that this is taking the big D out of democracy. We're taking away people's rights to weigh in on these individuals. What do you say to that?
Well, and this debate happened at the Wisconsin Convention on our Constitution. And we have always been very much a progressive state that has elections for almost anything. The problem is that with all these millions of dollars that are being put into the race by special interests, sometimes on both sides, are drowning out people's ability to be able to get to know the candidates. But just as importantly is what happens later. Our Supreme Court has decided that no matter how big a contribution is or how much money has been given to an election, it does not disqualify a justice from sitting on a case. So now people are questioning the validity of cases because a lot of the parties that are putting that money in are actually litigating or at least being friends of the court on cases up there. And so I think that, people can still participate. There's another option between the election and the appointed, which is what is called the Missouri Plan, where people are justices or judges, and I'm just advocating for the Supreme Court, are on a ballot, and every certain number of years you have to get a certain percentage of approval rating, and you don't run against anybody else. But those elections, too, have become really hijacked by special interests in a number of states.
So this has been called for by newspapers, and some members of the media have said we need to change the way we do business here in Wisconsin. Do you expect, though, that there to be any legislative push to change this? And this, I assume, would have to be a constitutional amendment, would it not?
Well, it would. It would have to be a constitutional amendment. I'm hoping that both parties understand that it's not just a partisan race, which has become, but it has damaged the court. And you look at those members of the court who have gone through those kinds of elections, and they have been damaged in terms of their own personal reputation. Some of them have had ethics complaints filed against them, rightfully or wrongfully, and they are constantly under attack because of what happened during their races. I think it's time that we get the best qualified person to come through a process that's open, transparent, and then the governor selects out of that group as opposed to the election process.
Former State Supreme Court Justice Janine Geske was appointed by Tommy Thompson back in 1993, correct?
Right.
All right. Thanks very much for being
Thank
with us
you.
today. Coming up next on Up Front, the changing face of unions, organized labor's effort to reach out to women. And our editorial partner, WisPolitics.com, keeps you up to date on state government and political news. Just check out the homepage at WisPolitics.com.